On this edition of Friday Night Arcade, we're going to take a closer look at some sequels to NES games that you potentially missed along the way. For various reasons, such as being released only in Japan or just being released on an entirely separate console, these NES game sequels fell through the cracks and a lot of folks probably never got a chance to see them. Let's take a closer look at some of these interesting titles on this edition of Friday Night Arcade. Upon defeating the final boss in the original Shadowgate game on the NES, your character is greeted by the king who gives you his daughter's hand in marriage, and you're dubbed the High Lord of Westland. Cool. But there's also a cryptic message at the very end of the text that just says, "The first story's end." This hinted that maybe there would be more entries in the Shadowgate franchise. Although other similar point-and-click adventure games such as Deja Vu and Uninvited were eventually released on the Nintendo Entertainment System, we didn't really get a true sequel to the Shadowgate story until much later on the Nintendo 64 with Shadowgate 64: Trials of the Four Towers. This game was not well received and just didn't really recapture the former glory of the original. I rented it once and never really connected with it. There was another planned sequel for the Nintendo 64 entitled Shadowgate Rising, but that project was eventually abandoned when it became clear the GameCube was about to take over. There have been some remakes and reboots of Shadowgate along the way, and there was even an entry in the Worlds of Power book series dedicated to the Shadowgate story. However, there is a sequel to Shadowgate that most people probably never even heard of, Beyond Shadowgate. This was released on the Turbografx 16 via the CD-ROM add-on? Wait, what? So let me get this straight. They made a series of point-and-click adventure games on the Mac in the 80s, ported them over to the Nintendo Entertainment System in a slightly different order, and then released a direct sequel to Shadowgate on the CD-ROM add-on for the Turbografx 16 system that hardly anyone owned or could afford. This was developed by ICOM Simulations 2, just like the other game, and released in 1993. This looks and feels like a Shadowgate game, so the interface is a little different. We've switched to a third-person view instead of a first-person view. Instead of pointing and clicking with commands at the bottom of the screen, you can use the select button to just switch your icon on the fly between various actions, such as examine, speak, or take. You can bring up your inventory and use items in real time to interact with your environment and solve puzzles. The graphics are a slick 16-bit upgrade over the original, and they even included voice acting to flesh out the story since it's all on CD-ROM.
There is more to the events of the last few weeks than the murder of a king and false arrest of his heir. There looms a far greater threat, which you must ultimately face within the walls of Shadowgate.
There's multiple endings too, which gives the game plenty of replay value. This is awesome, and I wish I would have gotten a chance to play through this one as a kid. Gradius is one of my favorite space shooters, despite the fact that I'm terrible at Gradius and space shooters in general, but the fantastic music and cool graphic design always kept me coming back for more punishment. We got Gradius on the NES and Gradius III on the Super Nintendo, but Gradius II never saw a release outside of Japan on the Famicom in 1988 until recently on the Virtual Console. I want to talk about the Famicom version though, because they pulled off some pretty crazy things here. Konami used a special chip in the cartridge that pushed the Famicom hardware to its 8-bit limits, and it's a shame US audiences never got a chance to experience this. I can only speculate that maybe it never got a US release because Konami didn't want to fork out the extra production costs stateside that it would have taken to produce cartridges with the special chips. This game is a must-play for space shooter fans. What? Why? Super Mario Bros. 2. Okay. By now everyone knows the US release of Super Mario 2 was just a repackage of Doki Doki Panic because Nintendo thought the audience in the States wouldn't be able to handle the extreme difficulty of the real Super Mario Bros. 2. And you probably gotta look at this with the Super Mario All-Stars re-release on the SNES that had the original 3 Super Mario Bros. Games plus the real Super Mario 2 repackaged as the Lost Levels. I never could get into this version though because the 16-bit remixes of all these classic games just feels like entirely different games to me. I never spent much time with them. So I'm talking about the real, honest-to-goodness Japanese-only release of Super Mario Bros. 2, released as a disc for the Famicom Disk System. If you enjoyed the original, I highly recommend seeking out the real Super Mario Bros. 2, either on Virtual Console or somewhere. Playing through this is kinda surreal. It looks and feels like the first one, exact same music and graphics. It feels more like an expansion pack to the first game than its own original thing. But the difficulty is ramped up significantly with stage hazards like wind, poison mushrooms, trick warp zones that go backwards, and the stages were designed by the devil. You only get 3 lives, but you do get unlimited continues, so you can just keep trying. You can also play as Mario or Luigi. Luigi can jump higher, but he slides all over the place compared to Mario. There's also several secret levels if you can find them. If you enjoy the original but don't really play it anymore because you've seen everything it has to offer, definitely seek out the real Super Mario Bros. 2 sometime. Ducktales 2. Well, okay, so this isn't exactly breaking news either, but a lot of folks missed out on this one. It was released in 1993, which is kinda late in the NES lifespan, thus making it pretty rare and hard to find these days, aka ridiculously expensive. A loose cartridge goes for over $150 on the secondary market compared to the original, which you can get for like $15. DuckTales 2 is basically the same game, at least on the surface. Good music, similar graphics, and non-linear level design. It looks and smells a lot like the first game, except they added a power-up feature for Scrooge's cane, which you need to break bricks and open up new areas in the levels. This makes for some backtracking across levels that could annoy some players. Also though, the levels aren't nearly as pretty to look at as the first game. They're all just kinda dank and boring compared to the exotic locations from the first game. And the music, while good, isn't nearly as memorable. Overall, this game just kind of feels like an awkward remix of the first game. It's not at all terrible or anything. I mean, even a bad Capcom NES game is still probably better than most of the other stuff out there, but the hefty price tag will probably prohibit most folks from getting a chance to check this one out, and to be honest, you're not missing much. Well, some things are better left on the cutting room floor. Power Punch 2 is the unofficial sequel to Mike Tyson's Punch-Out that Nintendo would be comfortable if you never found out about. It was originally going to be titled Mike Tyson's Intergalactic Power Punch. This sequel didn't go into production until a couple of years after the original, and this time it was outsourced. The game was originally supposed to feature Mike Tyson, but at this point Tyson was in jail, so they switched him out for Mark Tyler. Iron Mike, Mark, claimed he could beat anyone in the universe, so a bunch of aliens took him up on that. You fight as Mark Tyler against aliens and robots in a totally forgettable intergalactic boxing competition. Nintendo took one look at the finished product and decided it wasn't worth publishing, but Chrome Studios somehow suckered ASC Games into selling this thing. This was a real NES cartridge that actually existed. It only goes for about $20 too, so you could totally buy it as a gag gift for your friends. Well, here's another game I had no idea even existed. Blaster Master 2 for the Sega Genesis? I knew there were some Game Boy spin-offs, a PlayStation version, a WiiWare version, and another on the Switch, but Blaster Master on Sega Genesis? Blaster Master was one of my favorite games on the NES. If you've been watching this channel for any period of time, you ought to know because I use the Stage 1 music almost all the time for my outros. Blaster Master 2 builds upon the gameplay of the first one where you can move around in a somewhat non-linear level, either in your tank or on foot. If you've never played Blaster Master, it's a lot like Metroid in that you travel around exploring levels and finding power-ups or items that help you proceed with the mission, rather than simply just moving left to right. I wish I could say I enjoyed Blaster Master 2, but it didn't necessarily grab me the way the first one did. Sunsoft outsourced the development of this one, and it shows. Right away, the music isn't nearly as good. Gone is that epic score from the first game, and it's replaced with that generic Sega Genesis twang. Ugh. Also, this game reminds me a lot of Super Empire Strikes Back. Everything in its dog is out to kill you, to the point where anytime you manage to kill something, it almost always drops a heart. You'll need as many as you can get because you'll constantly be taking damage. Also, the levels aren't nearly as non-linear this time around compared to the first one. They're mostly straightforward, and really at the end of the day, there's really only one way you can go. I will say the graphics are neat to look at though. It's weird seeing Blaster Master in 16-bit. The tank animations look nice. If you want a remix of Blaster Master, you can pick this one up for about $20. Well, here's another one I never knew about, Hudson's Adventure Island 4, or it was called in Japan, This was another sequel that never made it out of Japan, and fun fact, was the final officially licensed release for the Famicom in 1994. These games are platformers best described as Metroidvania-style adventures with all sorts of power-ups and different worlds to explore. You play as Master Takahashi, and you have to save all your friends from the Eggplant Wizard. Makes perfect sense, right? I always loved reading about the Adventure Island games in Nintendo Power, and they looked ridiculously fun, but unfortunately I just never got a chance to spend any real time with them as a kid. None of the rental stores in our area carried them, and I didn't know anyone that had them. And now there's a fourth one that I'm gonna have to get into that I didn't even know existed. Geesh, my video game backlog is really piling up. Someday I'm gonna have to go back and spend some more time with this series on this channel. What about you? Did you get a chance to play these growing up? And for that matter, what are some long-lost sequels that I'm missing here? Let me know in the comments below so I can include them next time. Hey, I do this sort of thing all the time on my channel. If you enjoyed this, feel free to leave a like as it does help, and here's some other videos that you might enjoy. You can also subscribe for new videos each week, and if you haven't already done so, make sure to click the bell notification on the front page because otherwise YouTube has a funny habit of not letting you know when I've uploaded a new video. Hey, thank you so much for watching. Please don't text and drive, and I'll see you next time on Friday Night Arcade.